You don't wake up one morning and decide to become a criminal. It happens slowly. It happens when the math just doesn't add up. I grew up in South Central LA, not the parts they show on television, but the forgotten blocks where the streetlights are always broken, and the sound of police sirens is just background noise, like the wind. When my parents passed away, one from a quiet sickness the doctors caught too late, the other from a heart that just gave out from working 3 minimum wage jobs, there was no dramatic funeral. There was just an empty apartment, past due bills on the kitchen counter, and my little brother, Marcus was 5. I was barely 17. The first thing I learned wasn't how to hustle, it was how to hide. If Child Protective Services found out a teenager was living alone with a 5-year-old, Marcus would be gone by sundown. He'd be swallowed up by the foster system, bounced from house to house. I couldn't let that happen. He was all I had left, so I lied. I told the landlord my uncle was working night shifts and sleeping during the day. I paid Mrs. Higgins, the elderly woman down the hall, $50 a week in cash, money I didn't really have, just to keep her mouth shut and watch Marcus while I tried to find work. But nobody hires a scrawny 17-year-old dropout for anything that pays a living wage. I worked off the books at a car wash. I swept floors at a bodega. At the end of the week, my hands would be bleeding, my back aching, and I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at $60. Rent was $800. Electricity was $50. Marcus needed shoes. He needed milk. He needed to be a kid. The math didn't add up. I remember the first time I stole. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't a jewelry store. It was a 24-hour pharmacy on Figueroa Street. I stood in aisle 4 for 20 minutes, sweating, my heart hammering in my throat. I slipped a box of macaroni, a loaf of bread, and a carton of milk into my backpack. I walked out waiting for an alarm to sound, waiting for a hand to grab my shoulder. Nothing happened. The automatic doors just slid open and I walked out into the warm night air. That night, watching Marcus eat a warm bowl of pasta, laughing at cartoons on a TV with a cracked screen, I felt a dangerous realization settle in my chest. It was so easy. After that, the line between right and wrong just blurred. The grocery store lifting turned into boosting power tools from open trucks. Boosting tools turned into selling stolen car parts to shady mechanics who didn't ask questions. Eventually, I started running with an older crew, doing midnight residential burglaries. I told myself I was a good person doing bad things for a good reason. Every stolen dollar went into an envelope labeled Marcus. It paid the rent. It bought his school supplies. It bought his silence when the other kids asked why his parents never came to parent-teacher conferences. Of course, the streets always collect their debt. Between the ages of 18 and 22, I was arrested 4 times. The first few were misdemeanors, petty theft, possession of stolen property. I remember standing in those freezing county courtrooms, smelling like bleach and sweat, listening to public defenders who couldn't even remember my name mumble to judges who didn't look up from their paperwork. They gave me probation. They gave me short stints in county jail, 30 days here, 60 days there. Every time I sat in a cell, listening to the echoing metal doors, I swore I was done. I swore I'd find a real job. But then they'd release me. They'd hand me my street clothes in a paper bag, open the gates, and spit me right back onto the same broken sidewalk, with a criminal record attached to my name, making it even harder to get hired anywhere. and waiting at home was Marcus. Growing taller, needing more, entirely unaware that the roof over his head was built on stolen money. I wasn't a mastermind. I wasn't a gangster. I was just a tired, terrified older brother, trapped in a cycle I didn't know how to break, running as fast as I could just to stay in the exact same place. No glory in a warehouse break-in. There is no master plan, no blueprint spread across a table. It was a cold Tuesday night in November. The target was a wholesale electronics storage unit in an industrial park. It was supposed to be empty. It was always empty on Tuesdays. I was 19 now. I was sitting behind the wheel of a beat-up 1998 Honda Civic, the engine idling quietly. The heater was broken, so I just sat there shivering in my cheap jacket, watching my breath fog up the windshield. My job was simple. I was the driver, the lookout. If I saw headlights turning into the alley, I was supposed to flash the high beams twice, and we'd all vanish into the night. I was listening to the low static of the radio when I saw it. Not headlights. A flashlight beam sweeping across the frosted glass windows of the second floor. My stomach dropped. That wasn't supposed to happen. The security company wasn't contracted to do rounds until 3:00 a.m. It was only midnight. I flashed the high beams, once, twice. Nothing happened. Panic started to claw in my throat. I didn't drive away. I couldn't. These were the guys who helped me pay my rent. So I pushed the car door open, stepped out into the freezing damp air, and jogged toward the side entrance they had pried open. I stepped inside the dark, cavernous warehouse. It smelled like damp cardboard and motor oil. Then I heard the shouting. It wasn't a cool, calculated movie scene. It was the messy, ugly sound of scared kids losing control. I ran down the aisle just in time to see it. It wasn't a heroic police officer. It was just an old man in an oversized security jacket. He had dropped his thermos, spilling coffee across the concrete floor. One of the guys from my crew, a twitchy kid named Ricky, who was always trying to prove how tough he was, had panicked. Ricky swung a crowbar. There was a sickening, hollow crack. The old man crumpled to the ground, groaning, holding his head as dark blood pooled on the gray concrete. "What did you do?" I screamed, lunging forward, grabbing Ricky by the collar and shoving him backward. "What did you just do?" Ricky was hyperventilating, his eyes wide with pure terror. He dropped the crowbar. He didn't say a word. He just turned and sprinted toward the loading docks, leaving me standing there in the dark. I looked down at the old man. He was trying to breathe, his chest heaving. I should have run. Every survival instinct I had developed on the street screamed at me to run, but my feet felt like lead. I knelt beside him, hands shaking, and pulled out my flip phone to dial 911. I didn't even get to press send. The alleyway outside suddenly lit up with the flashing, silent strobe of red and blue lights. A silent alarm had been tripped the moment they broke the inner office door. The police didn't yell freeze. They just swarmed. Within 60 seconds, I was face down on the freezing concrete, a knee pressed hard into my spine, the cold metal of handcuffs biting into my wrists. I didn't fight. I didn't say a word. I just closed my eyes and thought of Marcus sleeping in his bed, waiting for me to come home with breakfast. The legal system doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care that I didn't swing the crowbar. It only cares about the math. I was the driver. I was at the scene of a felony where someone suffered severe bodily harm. Add that to my juvenile record and my previous misdemeanors, and the math was simple. The public defender, a tired woman carrying 3 boxes of files, met me in a sterile room that smelled like bleach. She told me the guard survived, but he had a fractured skull. She looked at me not with pity but with exhaustion. "Take the plea deal, Alex," she said softly. "If we go to trial, they'll paint you as a violent gang member. You'll get 15 years. The plea is 6. 6 years. I signed the paper. Just like that, my youth was over. But the hardest part wasn't the sentence. The hardest part came 3 days later. A social worker visited me at the county jail. She sat across from me, separated by a thick pane of bulletproof glass. She held a manila folder in her hands. "Alex," she said, her voice completely detached, "when the police executed the search warrant at your apartment, they found your brother, Marcus." I felt the air get sucked out of the room. I pressed my hands against the glass. "Where is he? Is he okay? Did Mrs. Higgins take him?" The social worker shook her head. "There is no legal guardian on file. You are a minor and now a convicted felon. Child Protective Services has taken custody of Marcus. He has been placed in a group home." I begged her. I cried. A 19-year-old kid in an orange jumpsuit, sobbing uncontrollably, begging a stranger to let me call him, to let me explain that I didn't abandon him. She just closed the folder, stood up and walked out. I was escorted back to my cell. The heavy steel door slid shut with a loud, definitive clang. It was the loneliest sound in the world. I sat on the thin mattress, buried my face in my hands, and for the first time in my life, I truly realized what I had done. I hadn't saved my brother. I had destroyed him. People who have never been locked up think the worst part of prison is the violence. They picture daily yard fights and shivs in the dark. But at first, the worst part is the noise. It's the constant, echoing hum of hundreds of angry men trapped in a concrete box. It's the slamming of heavy steel doors that vibrates in your teeth. You are completely surrounded by people, yet you have never been more alone. For my first year, I tried to be a ghost. I kept my head down, ate the tasteless food, and stared at the cinder block walls. Every single night, my mind played the exact same movie. Marcus, sitting in a strange room in a group home, waiting for a brother who was never coming back. The guilt was suffocating. But in a California state prison, you can't be a ghost forever. Eventually, the politics find you. The system is strictly segregated. You stick with your own race, your own car. If you don't ride with them, you're unprotected prey. The test came in my second year. I was working a shift in the industrial laundry room. The air was thick with steam and the smell of industrial bleach. A guy named Hector, a mid-level shot caller from a local block, cornered me in the blind spot behind the commercial dryers. 2 heavy-set guys stood blocking the exits. Hector didn't yell. He didn't threaten me like a movie villain. He just casually pulled a small, tightly wrapped package wrapped in electrical tape from his waistband and pressed it into my chest. I knew exactly what it was. A handmade shank, Dow T letter 1EF1 CH letter 1EBF. There's a shakedown coming, Hector said quietly. The guards are tossing our cells tonight. You're clean. You don't bang. You keep this in your mattress until tomorrow. We'll owe you a favor. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Time slowed down. I felt the sweat dripping down my neck. This was the moment that breaks people. If I took it, I was theirs. They would own me for the rest of my sentence. And if the guards found it in my cell, that's an automatic weapon charge. 6 years turns into 10. 10 turns into 15. I thought about the math. I thought about Marcus. I looked Hector dead in the eye, and I let the package drop to the wet concrete floor. I'm just doing my time, man, I said, my voice shaking just a little. I'm not holding. Hector's eyes went cold. He nodded slowly. You gotta pay a toll to stay out of the politics, kid. I didn't even have time to brace myself. The first punch caught me in the jaw, sending me crashing against the metal dryer. I didn't fight back. I knew if I threw a punch, it would turn into a riot and I'd catch a new charge. I just curled into a ball on the wet floor, protecting my head and my neck. Heavy steel-toed boots kicked into my ribs, my back, my stomach. It lasted maybe 40 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I tasted copper in my mouth. I heard a sickening crack in my chest. Then just as quickly as it started, they stopped. Hector picked up the package. You don't talk, he whispered, before the three of them blended back into the steam of the laundry room. I spent the next 2 weeks in the infirmary with 3 broken ribs and a fractured cheekbone. When the guards asked what happened, I gave them the standard prison answer. I slipped in the shower. I didn't snitch. I took the beating. I paid my toll with blood and broken bones, but I kept my 6-year sentence intact. I had bought my neutrality. When I finally got back to my block, moving slow and holding my ribs, that was when I formally met Arthur. Arthur was an older inmate doing 25 to life. He walked with a slight limp, pushing a mop bucket down the cell block hallways. He was quiet, and the younger guys left him alone. One afternoon during rec time, I was sitting alone on a metal bench, wincing every time I breathed. Arthur sat down on the other end. He didn't look at me. He just pulled a battered, taped-up paperback book from his jacket and slid it across the metal surface toward me. You bought your piece, kid, Arthur said quietly, his eyes fixed on the razor wire. You took a heavy hit to keep your time short, but what are you gonna do with it? You're bleeding out. I frowned, wiping a fatting bruise on my jaw. I stopped bleeding a week ago. Your mind is bleeding, he replied. You're living in the past, chewing on your own mistakes. It's gonna eat a hole right through you. Read the book, or don't. But build something in here before this place turns you into an animal. He stood up and walked away. I looked at the book. It wasn't fiction. It was a study guide for the GED. Under the dim, buzzing light of my cell, I opened the first page. It was agonizingly slow. Trying to learn algebra while my ribs screamed in pain felt impossible. But for the first hour I studied, I realized something. The math problem demanded my attention. It was a puzzle that had a definitive, logical answer, unlike my life. Arthur became my quiet mentor. He taught me that real power wasn't a game. It was the ability to control your own mind when the world takes everything else away. Once I passed my GED, I didn't stop. I read biographies, economics, and business. I realized that the hustle I thought was so smart, stealing and running the streets, was the dumbest math in the world. I had traded 6 years of my life and my brother's entire childhood for a few $1,000s that was already gone. I had been an idiot. I had to kill the old Alex, the angry street kid, so that the new one could survive to find Marcus. Time in prison doesn't move in a straight line. It moves in circles. You wake up, you eat, you work, you sleep. The seasons change outside, but you only know it because the concrete floors feel a little colder in December, and the air in the cell block gets thick and suffocating in July. My third year turned into my fourth. My fourth bled into my fifth. The bruises on my ribs faded, but the quiet, invisible armor I was building inside my mind grew thicker. I spent most of my time in the prison library. Arthur had pulled some strings with the guards to get me a job there, repairing torn books with clear tape. Arthur wasn't a father figure like you see in the movies. He didn't give me warm hugs or tell me everything was going to be all right. He was a man doing 25 to life for armed robbery. He had made a choice decades ago that cost a man his life, and he carried that ghost with him every single day. Arthur's way of showing he cared was brutal honesty. When I proudly showed him my GED certificate, expecting a pat on the back, he just looked at it, nodded, and handed me a worn-out textbook on macroeconomics. "Good," he said, his voice graveling. "You proved you're not an idiot. Now prove you can actually build something. A piece of paper won't stop a bullet and it won't pay the rent. Keep reading." We spent hours sitting at those scratched wooden tables in the library. We didn't talk about our feelings. We talked about supply and demand. We talked about how businesses fail. We talked about the psychology of the streets. One rainy afternoon, while we were tapping up a stack of ruined encyclopedias, I finally asked him the question that had been bothering me for years. "Arthur," I said, keeping my voice low, "why do you care? You're never getting out of here. Why spend your time making sure I do?" Arthur didn't stop working. He meticulously smoothed a piece of tape over a torn spine. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the heavy rain hitting the frosted glass windows near the ceiling. "Because I had a kid," he finally answered, never looking up. "He would be about your age now. He grew up visiting me through bulletproof glass. Then one day he stopped visiting. A year later, a chaplain walked into my cell and told me my boy caught a bullet in a drive-by over some stupid turf war." Arthur stopped moving. His hands were shaking just a fraction of an inch. He placed the tape dispenser down carefully. "I couldn't save my kid, Alex," he whispered, looking out the window at the gray sky. "I was in a concrete box while the world chewed him up. So, I'm saving you. Because if you walk out those gates and go back to the streets, then everything I've done in this life is a complete waste. He looked back at me, his eyes hard and fierce. You have a brother out there. You have a reason to breathe. Don't you ever forget that. I never asked him about his son again. But from that day on, I didn't just study for myself. I studied for Arthur too. Then came the final month. When you first get locked up, freedom is all you dream about. But when the release date actually approaches, the dream turns into a nightmare. They call it being institutionalized. I was terrified. I was a 24-year-old man who hadn't touched a real doorknob, held a smartphone, or chosen his own meals in over half a decade. I didn't know how to talk to normal people. I had a felony record branded onto my name. I had $0 to my name. The world outside felt like an ocean, and I didn't know how to swim anymore. The night before my release, Arthur came to my cell. He stood on the other side of the bars. He didn't smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, sliding it through the steel grates. It's an address, Arthur said. An old friend of mine. He runs a food truck down in the valley. He doesn't care about records if things get bad, and they will get bad. You go see him. I took the paper. It felt heavy in my hand. Arthur, I didn't know what to say. Thank you. He gripped the steel bars. His knuckles were white. Listen to me very carefully, Alex, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. When those gates open tomorrow, you walk straight. You don't look back at this place. And if I ever see your face inside these walls again, I'll break your jaw myself. It was the most beautiful goodbye I had ever heard. The next morning, they handed me a paper bag with the clothes I was arrested in 5.5 years ago. They gave me $200 in gate money and a bus ticket. The heavy steel doors slid open. The bright California sun hit my face, completely blinding me. The air smelled like exhaust fumes and cut grass. There were no sirens. There was no noise. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I didn't look back, but as I walked toward the bus stop, completely alone in a world that didn't want me, the silence was absolutely deafening. They gave me $200 at the gate. $200 to restart a life that had been paused for half a decade. I took the city bus downtown. I sat in the very back, staring out the window. The world was moving so fast. People were glued to smartphones that didn't exist when I went in. The cars looked different. The billboards were selling things I didn't understand. I felt like an alien dropped onto a foreign planet, wearing a pair of outdated jeans and a jacket that smelled faintly of prison bleach. The first thing you realize about freedom is how expensive it is. By the second day, my gate money was cut in half. I bought a cheap prepaid phone, a toothbrush, and paid for 2 nights at a rundown SRO, a single-room occupancy hotel above a liquor store, where the walls were paper-thin and the hallways smelled of stale beer and desperation. On the 3rd day, I started looking for work. I was naive. I thought having a GED and a willingness to work until my hands bled would be enough. I walked into diners, auto shops, grocery stores, and construction sites. I would put on my best face, look the manager in the eye, and ask for an application. They would smile, hand me a clipboard, and walk away. Then I would sit down and see it, the box. It's always near the bottom of the first page. A small, innocent-looking square with a simple question next to it. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? The first few times I tried to leave it blank, the managers would look over the paper, notice the blank space, and hand it back. You missed a spot, son. So I started checking it. I watched the exact moment their demeanor would change. It was never dramatic. They didn't yell or throw me out. It was just a subtle shift in their eyes. The smile would freeze. The polite nod would become stiff. We'll keep this on file, they would say, sliding the paper into a drawer that I knew was a trash can. We'll call you. Nobody ever called. By the end of the second week, I was out of money. The SRO manager kicked me out. I had my duffel bag, my prepaid phone with no minutes left, and Arthur's folded piece of paper with the food truck addressed deep in my pocket. But the food truck was 20 miles away in the valley, and I didn't even have bus fare. Besides, pride is a dangerous thing. I wanted to prove I could survive on my own before I begged for a handout from Arthur's friend. That night, I slept on a piece of cardboard under the 110 freeway overpass. I remember the cold. LA nights can cut right through your clothes when you're sleeping on concrete. I lay there shivering, listening to the roar of the 18-wheelers passing overhead, clutching my bag to my chest so no one would steal it. The physical pain of homelessness is awful, but the mental toll is what destroys you. When you walk the streets with a heavy bag and unwashed hair, people don't look at you. They look through you. You become invisible, a ghost all over again. There were nights when the hunger was so sharp, and the cold so bitter that my mind would wander back to the old neighborhood. I knew the numbers. I knew the corners. I could walk to payphone, make one call to an old associate and have a hot meal, a warm bed, and $100 in my pocket by midnight. All I had to do was run a package. All I had to do was slip back into the dark. It would have been so easy. But every time my hand drifted toward my pocket to find some change for the payphone, I thought of Arthur's voice. If I ever see your face inside these walls again, I'll break your jaw myself. And I thought of Marcus. If I went back to the streets, I would lose the right to ever look my brother in the eye. So I tightened my jacket, drank water from a public fountain to kill the hunger pangs, and went asleep on the concrete. My break finally came on a rainy Thursday. I was standing outside a massive logistics warehouse in an industrial zone, soaked to the bone, waiting for the foreman to come out. His name was Sal. He was a thick-necked guy with a clipboard and a cigar stub in his mouth. He needed day laborers to unload shipping containers. He looked at me, dripping wet and shivering. "You got paper?" Sal asked, meaning a clean ID. "I'm on parole," I said straight out. I was too tired to lie. "I'll work harder than any 3 guys you got in there. I just need a chance." Sal stared at me for a long time. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Cheap, disposable labor that couldn't complain to HR. "Minimum wage," Sal grunted. "Under the table, and listen to me very carefully, convict. I got cameras everywhere. You don't take a lunch break unless I say so. You don't talk to the regular staff. If a single box of inventory goes missing, I don't call the cops. I call your parole officer and tell him you violated. You understand?" Yes, sir, I swallowed hard. Grab a pair of gloves from the bin, he pointed to the loading dock. Start with container 4. It was grueling, back-breaking work. Unloading heavy boxes of imported auto parts in a suffocating metal container. They watched me like a hawk. When I walked to the bathroom, a supervisor would follow me. When my shift ended, a security guard patted me down to make sure I wasn't stealing anything. It was humiliating. I was being treated like a feral dog. But at the end of the week, Sal handed me a thin envelope with cash inside. It wasn't much, barely enough to rent a corner in a shared room and buy some cheap groceries. But as I sat on a milk crate in the alley behind the warehouse, eating a cold sandwich and counting those wrinkled bills, my hands were shaking. It was the first honest money I had ever made in my entire life. No one was hurt for it. No one was robbed. I had traded my own sweat for it. I looked up at the gray sky, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I'm coming, Marcus. Just hold on." It took me 8 months working at the warehouse to save $1,000. I didn't spend a dime on myself. My shoes had holes in them, and I was eating rice and beans out of a hot plate in my room. But every dollar I stuffed into that envelope felt like a step closer to Marcus. I knew I couldn't just walk into the Department of Child and Family Services and ask for him. To the system, I wasn't a brother. I was a convicted violent felon. Their files were sealed, so I did what you have to do when the system locks you out. I found a cheap skip tracer online, a guy who tracks public records, school registrations, and property deeds for a fee. I gave him all my saved cash, Marcus's full name and his date of birth. 3 days later, he handed me a printed piece of paper with an address in Pasadena. I called in sick to the warehouse, knowing Sal might fire me for it. I didn't care. I took 3 different buses out of the grim, gray industrial zone of LA and into the suburbs. The contrast made me sick to my stomach. The neighborhood in Pasadena was quiet. The streets were lined with massive oak trees. There was no trash on the sidewalks. The only sound was the gentle hiss of automated sprinklers watering perfectly manicured green lawns. I stood across the street from a beautiful 2-story house with a white garage. I felt like a stain on their perfect sidewalk. I pulled my jacket tight, hiding my faded t-shirt, suddenly painfully aware of how I looked. At 3:15 p.m., a yellow school bus stopped at the corner. A teenager stepped off. My breath caught in my throat. My brain still remembered a scrawny 5-year-old missing a front tooth, wearing clothes that were 2 sizes too big. But the kid walking down the street was 16. He was tall, healthy, wearing a crisp polo shirt, expensive sneakers, and carrying a heavy backpack. He was laughing with a friend before turning up the driveway of the 2-story house. It was Marcus. My legs moved before my brain could process what I was doing. I crossed the street. My heavy work boots crunched on the gravel of the driveway. "Marcus," I said, my voice cracked. It sounded weak, pathetic. He stopped putting his key in the front door and turned around. He looked at me with slight annoyance, probably thinking I was a door-to-door salesman or a vagrant who had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. "Can I help you?" he asked. He didn't recognize me. Half a decade in a concrete box had aged me 10 years. I had scars on my face. My eyes were tired. It's me, I stammered, taking a small step forward, keeping my hands open so I wouldn't scare him. It's Alex. The annoyance on his face didn't turn into a smile. It didn't turn into shock. It turned to ice. He stepped back, pressing his shoulders against the heavy wooden door of the house. The way he looked at me wasn't just cold, it was defensive. It was the look you give a dangerous stranger. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice dropping low, making sure the neighbors couldn't hear. "I just got out," I said, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a desperate rush. "I've been looking for you. I wanted to see you, Marcus. I just wanted to know you were okay. I know what they probably told you about me, but I need you to know the truth. Everything I did, the stealing, the crew, I did it to pay the rent. I did it to buy you food. I took the fall so you could survive." I expected him to soften. I expected the movie ending where the little brother understands the tragic sacrifice. But Marcus just shook his head. His eyes were red, but there were no tears falling. Just pure, hardened anger. "You think that makes it okay?" he spat out, his voice shaking. "You think because you bought me groceries with dirty money, it makes you a hero?" "No," I pleaded. "No, I just didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice," Marcus cut me off, stepping forward. For a second I saw the little boy he used to be. I didn't care about the shoes, Alex. I didn't care about the apartment. I was 5 years old. I just wanted my brother. And you chose the streets over me. You chose a crew over me. You left me alone with a bunch of strangers who dragged me through group homes for 2 years before this family saved me. His words hit me harder than Hector's boots ever did in the prison laundry room. Every single syllable shattered the illusion I had built to survive my sentence. He was right, I hadn't saved him. I had abandoned him. "Alex," Marcus said, his voice turning terrifyingly calm. "These people inside this house, they are my parents. They put me through school. They sit with me at dinner. You're a criminal who ruined the only family I had left. I don't know you." At that moment, the front door opened. An older woman with kind eyes and an apron stepped out. She looked at Marcus, then looked at me, instantly sensing the tension. "Marcus, honey, is everything all right?" she asked, putting a protective hand on his shoulder. She looked at me, her guard going up. "Can I help you, sir?" I looked at the woman's hand on my brother's shoulder. I looked at the beautiful house, the safe street, the clean clothes. This was the math, finally adding up perfectly. He was safe. He was loved. He had a future, and I was the only dangerous thing left in his life. I took a step back, lowering my head. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice completely hollow. "I'm sorry, I had the wrong address." I turned around and walked down the driveway. I didn't look back. I walked past the manicured lawns, past the massive oak trees, all the way to the bus stop. I sat down on the cold metal bench, put my head between my knees, and finally let the tears fall. I wept for the 5-year-old boy I lost, and for the 16-year-old stranger I had just met. The old Alex died in prison, but at that bus stop, I realized the new Alex didn't have a reason to live either. I was completely, utterly, and finally alone. When you lose the only reason you have to live, your body doesn't just stop. That's the cruelest part. Your heart keeps beating, your lungs keep breathing, but the world goes completely gray. The Monday after I saw Marcus, I went back to the warehouse. I didn't speak. I didn't look anyone in the eye. I just put on my gloves, walked into the stifling heat of the shipping containers, and lifted boxes until my muscles screamed. I wanted the physical pain to drown out the silence in my head. But my silence made me a target. There was a crew of regular guys working the loading dock, older guys who weren't on parole. The shift leader was a heavy-set guy named Miller. Miller and his guys didn't like me. To them, I was just a stray dog Sal had brought in for cheap labor. What I didn't know was that Miller had a side hustle. He had been skimming high-value auto parts, fuel injectors, sensors, alternators, and selling them on the side for months. With a parolee working the floor, Miller finally had the perfect scapegoat. It happened on a Friday afternoon. Sal, the foreman, shut down the line. His face was red, a half-chewed cigar clamped in his teeth. "Nobody moves," Sal bellowed over the warehouse floor. "3 titanium exhaust valves are missing from the morning shipment. We're tossing the lockers." I didn't panic. I knew I was clean. I just stood by my open locker, staring blankly at the rusted metal door, while Sal and the security guard went through the bags. Then the guard pulled my duffel bag from the bottom shelf. He unzipped it. Reaching under my spare work shirt, he pulled out 3 small, heavy boxes, the exhaust valves. The entire warehouse went dead quiet. I stared at the boxes. My brain, slowed by grief and exhaustion, couldn't even process what I was looking at. "I didn't take those," I said. My voice was completely flat. I didn't even sound convincing to myself. Sal walked over. He didn't look angry, he just looked disgusted, like he had expected this all along. "You stupid, ungrateful punk," he spat. "I gave you a job when nobody else would even look at your application." "Sal, listen to me," I tried, stepping forward. "I didn't put them there. Look at the padlock. It's a standard combination. Anyone could have." "Shut your mouth," Sal yelled, pointing a thick finger at my chest. "I told you what would happen. Pack your trash. You're fired. And I'm calling your PO." Calling my parole officer meant an automatic violation. It meant going back to the concrete box. I looked past Sal's shoulder. Standing by the forklift was Miller. He was looking at me, chewing his gum, and he gave me a very faint, smug smirk. He knew he had won. He knew the system would never believe a convicted felon over a regular employee. Something inside me, a dam built of grief, rejection, and sheer exhaustion, finally cracked. It wasn't a calculated move. It wasn't self-defense. It was pure, unadulterated rage. The rage I felt at the system, at myself, and at the universe for taking Marcus away from me. I shoved past Sal. I closed the distance between me and Miller in 3 wide steps. Before he could even raise his hands, I drove my right fist straight into his jaw. The sound was a wet, heavy thud. Miller crashed backward into a stack of wooden pallets, taking them down with a deafening clatter. He scrambled to his feet, bleeding from his mouth, and lunged at me. It wasn't a movie fight. It was an ugly, desperate brawl. We rolled on the dirty concrete floor, throwing wild punches. The smell of diesel fuel, sweat, and blood filled my nose. I didn't even care if he hit me. I just wanted to destroy something. I wanted the outside of my body to feel as broken as the inside. It took 3 guys and the security guard to pull me off him. They pinned me face down against the concrete, twisting my arm painfully behind my back. I didn't struggle anymore. I just lay there, panting, tasting copper in my mouth, listening to the wail of police sirens approaching in the distance. 20 minutes later, I was back in handcuffs. The ride to the county jail was silent. The patrol car smelled exactly the way I remembered, like stale sweat and cheap vinyl. When we pulled into the sally port, the heavy metal gates groaned open, swallowing the car whole. They took my shoelaces. They took my belt. They put me in a holding cell with concrete walls painted a sickly institutional green. The heavy steel door slammed shut with that loud, definitive clank. I sat down on the cold metal bench. I was bleeding from a cut over my eye. My knuckles were swollen and purple. I stared at the floor drain in the center of the cell. Parole violation. Assault. I was going back to state prison. This time I wouldn't have Marcus to think about. I wouldn't have Arthur's macroeconomics books. I had nothing. Arthur's voice echoed in the back of my mind. If I ever see your face inside these walls again, I'll break your jaw myself. I leaned my head back against the freezing concrete wall, closed my eyes, and waited for the darkness to take me permanently. I had finally hit rock bottom, and the worst part was, I didn't want to get back up. I spent 48 hours in that holding cell, 2 days of sitting on a steel bench, listening to the muffled sounds of the jail, waiting for the transport bus to take me back to state prison. I didn't eat the bologna sandwiches they slid through the slot. I just stared at the wall, completely hollowed out. On the morning of the 3rd day, the heavy steel door unlocked, but it wasn't a guard with transport shackles. It was my parole officer, a heavy-set, exhausted man named Jenkins. He walked in, holding a manila folder, and stood looking down at me. "Stand up, Alex," Jenkins said. His voice wasn't angry, it was just tired. I stood up slowly, my ribs still aching from the fight. I put my hands behind my back, waiting for the cuffs. Jenkins didn't pull out his handcuffs. He tossed the folder onto the metal bench. "You're a very lucky, very stupid kid," Jenkins said, crossing his arms. "Sal called me on Friday to violate you. But here's the thing about paranoid bosses like Sal. He doesn't just put cameras on the loading dock. He puts them in the locker rooms too." I looked up confused. "The police reviewed the tapes," Jenkins continued. "They watched Miller pick the combination lock on your bag and drop those exhaust valves inside. Miller was running a theft ring right under Sal's nose. The grand theft charge against you is dropped." A tiny sliver of air entered my lungs, but I knew the math. "What about the assault?" I asked quietly. "I hit him." "You did," Jenkins nodded. "You broke his jaw, but Miller is facing 5 years for grand larceny and fencing stolen goods. His public defender told him that pressing assault charges against the guy he framed wouldn't look good in front of a jury, so he dropped it." Jenkins leaned in close. I could smell stale coffee and mints on his breath. "You are walking out of here today," Jenkins said, his voice dropping to a low warning. "But you are on the razor's edge, Alex. You have 0 strikes left. You have exactly 1 week to find a verifiable job, or I will violate you just for being unemployed. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," I whispered. An hour later, I was standing on the sidewalk outside the county jail. It was 11:00 p.m., and it was pouring rain. The kind of heavy, freezing California winter rain that washes the oil slick from the streets. They had given me my duffel bag back. I reached into the front pocket. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. It was wrinkled, damp, and had a smudge of my own dried blood on the corner. Arthur's note. The address for a food truck in the San Fernando Valley. I had no money for a bus. I had no phone. So I walked. I walked through the pouring rain. I walked past the glowing neon signs of liquor stores, past the silent, sleeping houses, past the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown LA my boots were soaked through. My muscles were screaming from the warehouse work and the fight. Every time I wanted to stop and lay down on a bus bench, I heard Arthur's voice, and I remembered the look in Marcus's eyes. I am a criminal who ruined his life. If I quit now, Marcus was right. I walked for 6 hours. The sky was just starting to turn a dark, bruised purple with the approaching dawn when I finally reached the address in the valley. It was an empty commercial parking lot next to a tire shop. Parked under a flickering streetlight was an old, boxy food truck. The paint was faded, but it was incredibly clean. Warm yellow light spilled from the serving window, cutting through the heavy rain. I stood in the rain, shivering uncontrollably, water dripping from my hair and my nose. I smelled roasted pork, cumin, and fresh corn tortillas. I walked up to the window. Inside was an older Mexican man. He had deep wrinkles around his eyes, thick silver hair, and he was methodically chopping cilantro on a stainless steel counter. He looked up, wiping his hands on a clean white apron. He didn't look scared of the bruised, soaked, terrifying-looking man standing at his window at 4 in the morning. "We are not open yet, Mijo," he said gently. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold the piece of paper. I slid the damp, blood-smudged note across the stainless steel counter. The old man picked it up. He put on a pair of reading glasses that hung around his neck and read the few lines Arthur had written. He didn't ask me what I had done. He didn't ask me about the blood on the paper. He didn't ask for a resume or check the box. He looked at the note, then looked at me. He saw exactly what I was, a drowning man reaching for a piece of driftwood. "My name is Hector Ramirez," the old man said softly. He folded the note and put it in his shirt pocket. He pointed to a narrow door at the back of the truck. "The door is unlocked. Come inside where it is warm. Can you wash dishes?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Good," Mr. Ramirez said, turning back to his cutting board. "Wash your hands, then I will make you something to eat." I stepped inside the truck. The heavy metal door closed behind me, shutting out the sound of the freezing rain. For the first time in 6 years, I felt warm. There is a romanticized idea of working in There is a romanticized idea of working in a kitchen. The fast pace, the camaraderie, the art of the food. But there is nothing romantic about the back of a food truck parked on a cracked asphalt lot in the San Fernando Valley. It isn't a kitchen, it's a metal tin can. For the first 2 years, Mr. Ramirez didn't let me touch a knife, let alone the flat-top grill. My universe was a 3-foot stainless steel sink in the back corner. In the dead of a Lowe's Angels summer, the temperature inside that truck would easily hit 115 degrees. The air was a suffocating mix of frying oil, roasting chilies, and bleach. I spent 10 to 12 hours a day scrubbing charred pork fat off heavy iron grates with scalding hot water and steel wool. By the end of a shift, my knuckles were raw and bleeding. My clothes were plastered to my back with sweat, and my feet throbbed so badly I had to limp to the bus stop. And the money was an insult. I was making minimum wage plus a small cut of the tip jar. I would stand there at 2 in the morning, my back screaming in pain, watching drunk college kids or arrogant guys in expensive suits toss crumpled $1 bills at me like I was a beggar. They didn't look at me. To them, I was just a pair of hands handing them a paper plate. That was when the old demon started whispering in my ear. The temptation didn't come to me like a movie villain offering me a duffel bag of cash. It came in the quiet, humiliating moments of exhaustion. It came when I was waiting in the rain for a late-night bus, shivering, knowing that I still had the phone numbers memorized. I knew the corners. I knew exactly who to call. My brain would start doing the toxic math of the streets. 1 hour of driving a package across town equals 2 months of scrubbing pots. I could have a warm bed. I could have a car with a working heater. I could be somebody again, instead of an invisible ghost wiping down a greasy counter. The breaking point happened on a sweltering Friday night in August. We were slammed. A line of 30 people stood outside the window, impatient and loud. I was trying to restock the glass soda bottles in the front fridge. My hands were slick with dishwater. I turned too fast. My boot caught on a floor mat, and the entire plastic crate of Mexican Coke slipped from my grip. It hit the metal floor with a deafening crash. Glass shattered everywhere. Dark, sticky soda exploded across the clean stainless steel, soaking my boots and pants. A frat kid at the window laughed and yelled, "Good job, dishwasher." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't just about the bottles. It was the 5 years in prison. It was the look of pure hatred on Marcus's face. It was the suffocating heat, the raw knuckles, and the overwhelming, crushing weight of being a nobody. My vision went red. I kicked the empty plastic crate so hard it cracked. I threw my wet towel against the wall, breathing heavily, my fists clenched tight enough to draw blood. I was ready to walk out that heavy metal door, find the nearest payphone and call in a favor. I was done. I was going back to the dark. Mr. Ramirez didn't yell. He didn't tell me to calm down. He calmly walked over to the serving window, slid the glass shut, and flipped the open sign to closed right in front of the line of angry customers. The truck suddenly went quiet, except for the hum of the generator and the hiss of the flat-top grill. He picked up a broom and handed it to me. I just stared at it, my chest heaving. "You are not angry at the glass, Alex," Mr. Ramirez said, his voice incredibly gentle, yet heavy with authority. "You are angry because you feel small. You want the harvest today, but you are furious that the seed you planted yesterday is still in the dirt." I swallowed hard, trying to fight back the hot sting of tears in my eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Hector. I'm busting my back for pennies. I'm drowning here." Mr. Ramirez walked past the mess and pointed to a massive, heavy aluminum pot sitting on the back burner. It was full of carnitas, pork shoulder that had been simmering since 6 in the morning. "Look at this meat," he said. "To make it tender, to make it pull apart with just a fork, it has to cook on a low flame for 12 hours. It takes patience. It takes time in the dark." He turned the burner knob, increasing the flame until it roared bright blue. "If you turn the heat all the way up because you are starving and you want to eat right now, what happens?" he asked me. "It burns," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Exactly," Mr. Ramirez nodded, turning the flame back down to a soft, steady flicker. "It burns on the outside and it stays tough and cold on the inside. You ruin it." He stepped closer, stepping right over the broken glass, and put his calloused, warm hand on my shoulder. "The streets are a high fire, Mijo," he said softly. "They give you money fast, they make you feel powerful today, but they burn you to ashes tomorrow. I know your past. I see the ghosts in your eyes, but a good life, a real life, takes time. It cooks on a low fire." He gently tapped my chest, right over my heart. "You are a good man, Alex, but you have to let the old you burn away slowly. Sweep the glass. Tomorrow we start again." His words didn't just calm me down, they dismantled me. He didn't judge my anger, he understood the root of it. I looked at the broom in my hand. I looked at the old man who had risked his livelihood to hire a convicted felon. I didn't walk out the door. I took a deep, shuddering breath, gripped the broom, and started sweeping up the broken glass. I stayed in the truck. I stopped looking for shortcuts. I learned how to endure the heat, the disrespect, and the exhaustion. Whenever the streets called my name in my mind, I just looked at the soft blue flame under the simmering pot. I learned how to cook my life on a low fire. 10 years passed in a blur of smoke, grease, and long nights. When Mr. Ramirez finally retired, his hands too shaky to hold the heavy knives, I didn't let him sell the truck to a stranger. I handed him a thick envelope containing every dollar I had saved over a decade. No stolen goods, no fast money, just thousands of hours of sweat and honest labor. After he moved back to Mexico to be with his sister, I kept the truck running. But I realized I couldn't stay in Los Angeles. The city held too many ghosts. Every street corner, every freeway overpass reminded me of the kid I used to be and the brother I couldn't save. I needed a clean slate. So I packed up the truck and drove cross-country to Chicago. I parked Mr. Ramirez's truck on the cold, windy streets of the Midwest. The people here didn't know my past. They only knew the food was incredible and the service was honest. The truck became a local staple. I eventually opened a small brick-and-mortar restaurant, then a second one. But I made a rule. Whenever I needed kitchen staff, I went to the halfway houses. I hired the guys with the box checked on their job applications. I gave them the broom, and I taught them about the low fire. The honest math finally added up. Tonight, I am 39 years old. I am standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment on the 80th floor, looking down at the Chicago skyline. Outside, a heavy thunderstorm is washing over the city. I can hear the deep rumble of thunder and the steady, calming sound of the rain beating against the thick glass. I am wearing a crisp white shirt. My hands are still rough, carrying the faint, permanent burn scars from the grill, but they are clean. And for the first time in my life, I am not alone. I turn away from the window and walk quietly down the soft carpet of the hallway. I push open a door that is cracked slightly ajar. Inside, illuminated by a small amber nightlight, is my 3-year-old son, sleeping soundly in his bed. Down the hall, my wife, Jennifer, the woman who loved me long before she knew about the restaurants, the woman who listened to my darkest secrets and stayed, is reading a book in bed. I stand in the doorway of my son's room, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing. I think about the cold concrete under the 110 freeway. I think about the fear of the police sirens, the taste of blood in the prison laundry room, and the stolen box of macaroni I fed Marcus when I was 17. I look at my son, and I make a silent vow. You will never know the cold, I tell him in my mind. You will never know what it feels like to be hungry, and you will never know the terror of a heavy steel door slamming shut. The roof over your head, the clothes on your back, the food on your plate, it is all paid for with clean hands, honest money. You will never have to carry the weight of a guilty conscience. I carried it all, so you will never have to. I haven't seen my brother Marcus since that day on the driveway in Pasadena. I never looked for him again. I used to think that was my greatest failure. But standing here now, watching my own son sleep safely while the storm rages outside, I finally understand. Sometimes real love is accepting that you are the villain in someone else's story, so they can go on to have a good one. My absence was the greatest gift I could ever give Marcus. He is safe. And because of the long, painful road I walked, my son is safe too. I gently pull his blanket up to his shoulders, step out of the room, and leave the door slightly open. I walk back to the living room, sit down on the sofa, and close my eyes. The ghosts of my past are finally, truly quiet. I just sit there, breathing in the peace, and listen to the sound of the rain falling over Chicago.